All right, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, good night if it is late at night for any of you. Thank you for joining. This is Krishna Vedula from Hyderabad, representing the Indo-Universal Collaboration for Engineering Education. Thank you all for joining. We have an exciting session for you today, led by my very dear friend, Dr. Archana Mantri, who is one of the outstanding, one of the top women leaders of engineering, and not just women, one of the top leaders of engineering education in India as a vice chancellor of Chitkara University. I've known her since the inception of IUCE way back in 2008, and very good to have known her all these years. She's an outstanding administrator, and more than that, she's a fantastic teacher, an expert in problem-based learning. So I really enjoyed our journey together for all these years, and I'm just going to leave it there and give this over to her as a facilitator for this discussion of the IFEES GEDC IUC Global Webinar. The title of the discussion today is Beyond the Books, and I think all of you know that we've had a series of books which feature women leaders in engineering, and so now we are going beyond the books, and this particular session has to do with the importance of knowledge for women empowerment. So over to you, Archana.
Thank you, Krishna. Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night to all of you who are attending this fabulous webinar with three most fabulous people populating this earth, I can say. These people, the two ladies, Catherine and Jane, are coming from the book Rising to the Top, Volume 1. And Michael is a sponsor of this initiative, which was taken by IFEES, GEDC, and Hans Hoyer to bring out the excellent women leaders in engineering education that we have across the globe. So I will not take much time, but introduce the three very good, and I would say you must listen to their stories. You must read to their stories. You must listen to them, not me. So I'll not take much time, but introduce the three of them. We have with us here Catherine J. Didion. She is the Vice President of the Didion Group. We have with us Dr. Jane Goodyear, and she is the Dean of Les Sonde School of Engineering at York University in Toronto, Canada. And we also have with us Dr. Michael K.J. Milligan, and he's the Executive Director and Chief Executive Officer of ABET, the global accreditor of over 4,000 college and universities programs in applied and natural sciences, computing, engineering, and engineering technology. I would go around the room. This is the brief introduction, just telling their names, but we must hear from them. So I'd invite Jane first to give her brief introduction of what is her current role and responsibilities. And I'm going to throw some questions at all of you, which will give an insight into your beautiful journey, challenging journey into engineering education. So Jane, first of all, please introduce yourself. Where are you working? What are your current roles and responsibilities? We'll move over then to Catherine and then to Michael. Jane.
Thank you, Archana. It's lovely to see everybody here today. Yes, I'm Dean of the Les Sonde School of Engineering, as Archana said, here in sunny Toronto today. It's beautiful. And my role is like a Chief Operating Officer. I'm the Chief Administrator for the School of Engineering. We have upwards of 5,500 students, and I look and support 150 faculty and about 100 staff, so 250 employees. It's a fairly large organisation, and I'm here to help the school flourish in terms of enabling research to intensify, to really support our excellence in teaching and learning, so that we actually produce the next generation of fantastic engineers and computer science. So that's my job.
Thanks, Jane. Over to you, Catherine.
Hello, everyone. My name is Catherine Didion. I also go by Kitty, so either one is fine. And right now I'm the vice president of the Didion Group, and it's a consulting firm where I work a lot with different clients, a lot on the diversity, equity, inclusion issues around engineering education. So 2 examples is for a corporation recently. I helped them set up a diversity, equity, inclusion advisory board. They never had one, and brought to the table different representative groups of the different types of recruitment they want and retention in terms of students and faculty and staff, and work with them to think about what were some of the things that they could be doing to look internally in terms of some of the measures as well as externally. And this had to do specifically with engineering graduate education. So thinking about what's happened, you know, even pre-pandemic, but particularly post-pandemic, about how we engage communities and how our assumptions about how we reach communities can often impact who we actually reach, which may not be who we're trying to target. Another example that I've been working on recently is helping engineering schools with some of their strategic plans, the new normal, as we call it, and what's happening in terms of thinking often with different resources and maybe less staff, how we think about how we engage in our community and what's happening in higher ed. And I think that what I love doing is working with different groups and bringing them together and seeing how we really have a shared mission, even though we may not always assume that we're always on the same side.
Great. How interesting, Catherine. And we'll move over to Michael.
Okay, well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and thanks for asking me to join this panel. This is a great opportunity, and thanks again for that. And ABET is very happy to support this activity, of course. So in my position, I lead a staff in Baltimore that basically supports the accreditation process, as you mentioned, over 4,000 programs in 41 countries, actually. And so we are becoming a more diverse organization all the time. The good news about ABET is we have an opportunity to really influence education in a pretty significant way globally, and especially in the area of diversity is critically important. We'll talk a little bit more about why that's important. You know, some of maybe my views on that, but we are in a prime position to help programs sort of develop in a way that they can be more inclusive across the board. So we're very happy to be again in that position.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you for sponsoring this initiative. I will move over to Catherine now. Catherine, I read with lot of interest your story, which was published in volume 1 of the Top. Some of the points that I would like to mention for the benefit of the audience is that Catherine has had a lot of variety of jobs in different countries. Am I right, Catherine?
Correct. Yes.
Yes. So I have a question, like, can you share us with your experience working for the nonprofit, and how does working for nonprofit help empower women? Especially if I look at your background in the book, in your story, what you have written, I really want to know, and the audience, so would the audience would be, how working for nonprofit would help empower the women for.
So I think what's so interesting about the nonprofit organizations, or often throughout the world, NGOs, non-governmental organizations, they often have a very explicit mission. So they're very program and impact focused. And not that men don't care about those issues, particularly, but I have found often women in engineering and science want to be working for an organization that has impact, that they feel like that my skills, my talent are being used. And I think nonprofits often are a great place, particularly when you're early in your career, to have an opportunity to kind of hone some skills that you might not be given an opportunity potentially at a very large university or very large corporation. But often with nonprofits, you will find out that multitasking is very important. So it gives you an opportunity to learn different skill sets. The other thing I would say about nonprofits that I think is really important is that they tend to very much focus on what you can be doing in terms of change in a relatively, I would say, not too short, but long enough to see the impact and the change. So for instance, when I was working with WEPAN, the Women Engineering Program Advocates Network, one of the things that we were really looking at and trying to engage in was looking at how we could work with institutions to really think about not only attracting women faculty, but retaining women faculty. When I was at the National Academy of Engineering, I did a study looking at women faculty in all what we call the research intensive, often referred to as R1 institutions. And what we found is that, often the resources given to the women faculty when they were hired were different than the male faculty, yet the expectations were that they would achieve the same. So I think what nonprofits allow you to do is to really hone some of the skills, learn some of the craft in terms of teamwork, how you engage, in terms of thinking analytically in a way that you can also see some results and really have a sense that this is where I'm making a difference, which for many of us is very important.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you for that insightful answer, because many of us come from very many structured organizations, and working for NGO can definitely, whatever you said, bring in a very different perspective and very different kinds of breeding grounds for new ideas to germinate, because there is no such structure or a kind of a control mechanism which is there. Jane, I found in your story that you come from a very humble background and you faced a lot of difficulties growing up, including your mother's death and moving around a lot. And one interesting fact that I found is that your stepmother was the reason, that's what you mentioned in your book, to take up, to pursue education. And I'm sure the journey ahead you would like to share, of course, because it's going to be an inspiration for many of the listeners. But I have a very specific question for you. How did moving around a lot as a child, because I read in your story you have moved a lot during the very few years of your childhood. You have moved around a lot, and as a child and living in different countries as an adult, did it shape your personality the way it is now as a woman?
Yes, it's an extremely good question, and you're right. I have come from humble beginnings, and for the audience, just to reiterate, I lost my mother to cancer when I was 10. My father didn't cope with it very well, and so myself and my brother were brought up by a stepmom who, she was wonderful, but I didn't really see my father during that time. And she was a very important inspiration when I was a teenager, because I could have gone a completely different route. And in that time, just to give you some context, I actually went to 9 different schools just in those informative years. And in a way, because it's quite a difficult question, I have to say, I think what has that left me with, I think it was, I had to learn how to adapt, constantly going to different schools. And as you know, kids can be not that inclusive when you are in another part of the country. You speak differently. As you can see, I'm British, but we have different dialects, and even having a different dialect could ostracize you. And so as a child, I learned how to adapt very quickly and to be accepted as a new person, particularly in an established circle of friends. And then as an adult, because I've moved to New Zealand and now to Canada, it's the same sort of dynamics, isn't it? You know, you're going into a different culture, a different organization with very, you know, everybody does things differently, and it's that ability to adapt that has molded me. And I think what has then led to how I am personally, I think if I think about it, it's being a good listener. Because when you're trying to adapt, you really need to listen to people and understand where they're coming from. And I think that's naturally then built me into being a learner and being inquisitive, because again, being moved around so many times, you have to learn in that situation. And so I think this gift,
you connected learning to listening, adapting to listening. I think that's an excellent point that you have brought up, Jane.
but Achana, until you asked me that question, I hadn't really thought about that. That's really what it's been about for me, is about being a listener and then having a gift for figuring out how people who are different can work together. So I actually now get a lot of enjoyment from working collaboratively with a lot of different people, because I naturally, because of my background of having to hone my skills, I just naturally bring people together.
Everything that happens for good.
I like to think so, yeah.
Now we have a leader like Jane amongst us, so great. Michael, you wear a very different hat, but you must have listened just now, both Jane and Catherine talking about equity and inclusion. My question to you is, when it comes to equity and inclusion, we worry about women, but please tell us about Abbott's effort to support diversity, inclusion, and equity. So on one hand, you're talking of accreditation to higher education institutes and so on. And on the other, we are talking about equity and inclusion. And the leaders are talking about it. What's your take on this?
Well, you know, we are an accrediting body, right? And so we accredit programs, but that's just a tool, okay? If you, as an organization, our mission really is to make the world a better place. We talk about that, making the world a better place. And you do that a number of ways. One is through quality in STEM education, which is part of what we do. But also, again, as I mentioned in my introduction, we have a leadership opportunity and kind of a obligation, kind of set the standards for education around the world. And so, you know, we promote diversity in a number of ways. We have it in our criteria, so that helps guide programs to pay attention to that as an important topic. We have had for some years now an annual award that recognizes achievements in diversity and inclusion, equity across the board, and in terms of faculty, we have industry and so forth. And so it's been something we've paid attention to for quite a while, but of course, I think now more than ever, it's critically important. And I'll just take another minute or two and just explain to you why I think that's a, you know, we're at a critical juncture. You know, the world, we have so many problems in the world, and we all know this, right? And they're not going to be solved by just a small subset of people. We need the best and brightest of all people everywhere in the world, right? And we all know, I think, that the best solutions come from diverse viewpoints. And so for all those reasons, you know, I think we need to promote diversity because it's the right thing to do, but it's also a necessary thing to do. And so, you know, like I said, I think we're at that juncture where, you know, we need to do everything that we can to promote diversity and inclusion.
Michael, it's beautifully said. What you said, it's not about a criteria or one thing in the accreditation process and making the world a better place to live, but it is also about the necessity of having diversity and inclusion. I think that's very important. And taking forward, Catherine, what is the importance of diversity in securing new engineering and scientific discoveries? You know, we talk about having, it's very important to have new scientific discoveries. And a layman would say what it has to do with having diversity. We should just bring best brain to this world, whatever gender it is. But do you think having an important stake, as Michael said, having diversity, even to the aspect of securing new engineering and scientific discoveries, do you agree with that? Should diversity be as an important aspect parameter or should it not be? What's your take?
So I agree with that, and I think that sometimes we set up this equation, this mathematical equation that's not correct. That says excellence cannot equal inclusion or diversity. But I would argue, if you think about how we approach things, if you think about technical challenges, I have a colleague who is a member of all 3 of the U.S. National Academies, first started in engineering, who created a company called Carbon that's doing a lot with tissue engineering and such. And what I remember that he said to me, Joe, is that his company is successful because the first 3 founders were all from different disciplines and different backgrounds. That they looked at a problem from a different perspective. And our perspective is not only our engineering or our scientific background or our discipline or what country we come from, but as you just heard so eloquently from Jane, her story of her experience and how it affected how she listens or hears people. So if we really want to think about what Michael talked about, absolutely the challenges we have, then we want to have the perspectives that look at things differently, and therefore the options we have to how we address them, and how we can have solutions are more varied, and therefore they're more likely to be successful. So I think that part of the problem is we assume that diversity and excellence don't go hand in hand. And I would argue, actually, in many cases they do. It's a definition of how we approach and the assumptions we make about what we mean, that we assume that excellence means you've had this experience, when in fact you may have a different experience but still have those skill sets and that talent.
I agree with you, Catherine, on that. I agree, and very crisp, in a very crisp manner, you actually brought this point out. Jane, I was really intrigued by your story and the kind of challenges you faced, whether it is moving around or losing your mother and so on and so forth. But having so many low points in your life all through, how did you keep going every time? What is it that kept you going? Jane, you need to answer this. There are so many people to really, listen from you. How did you keep going? It was such a difficult journey for you.
Again, Achana, you asked so very difficult questions. I've had to do a lot of soul seeking, to be honest with you. To be honest with you, it's quite hard to say how you become resilient. I believe I have some very deep down survival instinct. It comes down to that. I mean, when I was 18, I didn't have a family home. I didn't have any money. I did have an opportunity to take on education, and I could have made a decision to go a completely different path. But I think at that point in my time, I came to the realization personally that it was up to me and nobody else could help me. And so it was a very much of a wake-up call. And I just knew, I don't know how I knew, that I had the potential to do something. And this, I think, stemmed a bit from my stepmother. And I wanted to do something, but I didn't know what. So I think also losing 3 parents at that time, because I lost my mom, my dad, and my stepmother, it really made me truly understand that life is short at a very young age. And so I was at that point where I could go to university, and I knew that life was short. There was an opportunity in front of me. I took the opportunity, and then I've lived my life like that. If I see an opportunity or an opportunity falls on me, I take it, even if I just am so scared. And most of the time I am scared of making that leap. But it's really enabled me to see the potential that I can have to contribute. So that's a really difficult question to answer, and I hope I've answered it.
No, that's fine, because what you said is, you know, there is an old saying that in every challenge there is an opportunity. And probably the leader came out of you because you realized you took every challenge as an opportunity. When there was nothing, you thought that all the doors were closed. It was you who opened one of the doors and you just went out and you know, explored. So I think that's a very important aspect that you brought out, that challenges should not be the stumbling point. It should be an opportunity. But I also read in your story, Jane, that there was a big group of men, and you sort of supervised them as your first job as a young woman. So how did you do? What was your experience? What was the first feeling that went through you when you saw that on the shop floor there are 25, you know, men all in their middle ages, and you need to supervise them? How did it?
I know, it was because it was in the late 80s, 1980, early 90s, and the automotive industry was at their time quite a hard industry, and so I was one of 450 engineers in this company, and only 2 of us were women. And I was a production engineer, so my office is on the shop floor, and I looked after these 15 highly skilled set of operators, highly skilled. And I walked in, and there's this little person, you know, just like I am now with my glasses. But the first thing I did was I always wore a skirt. I had, do you know that what I mean by shoes that have got protector things? So I had these disgustingly looking shoes, but I made sure that they had heels, so they weren't normal, you know, men looking things. So I actually looked very different, and I was very pointed to do that. And they just thought, what the hell is going on here, you know? But the key to it was that, again, it wasn't about me being their boss, because I was their team leader. I appreciated from day one that they were highly skilled, and in fact acknowledged that I couldn't do their job, but they couldn't do their job without me. So it was something around, I've always thought that I'm there to support them. And I follow this on today. You know, the hierarchical structure of a business, and you've got the leader at the top, and then it cascades down. I've always thought it the other way around. I'm at the bottom supporting the operators, the people who are, you know, making things. And it's the same with my job today. It's the students who are at the top and the faculty, and then, you know, I'm at the bottom supporting. So I think that the way I see things has always helped me, you know, break down the barriers, because I'm there to help. And I think that just got me through it. And I had a really great time managing them. I really did.
Great. So Jane, you brought out again a very important aspect and a point, that complementarity. You know, being able to complement each other in any work instead of following a hierarchical kind of a structure. It makes a difference. You can make people a team. Thank you, Jane, for that insight. Catherine, when I was reading all the stories in the book, I found that you are the most international woman leader I found in the whole thing, because you have traveled, I think, across the world for and doing various kinds of jobs in you know, from Saudi Arabia to Switzerland to USA and so on and so forth. So how was your experience working in Saudi Arabia different than working in Switzerland, or for that matter in USA? Can you bring out some, I think, contrasts or similarities? How was it?
So for me, and again, this is my experience, and there may be experiences are different. It was a very different experience, but it was a very positive experience. And I was coming from Washington, D.C., from a culture. At that time, I worked at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, and my husband worked for the White House. And the first thing people would do in Washington, D.C., unfortunately, is they would ask you not what was your name and where were you from, but what was the title of your job? And then they would decide, are you important enough for me to talk to, or am I going to move to the next person over there? So I came from this culture where very much you were defined by your work and your job. And unfortunately, Jane, it was a very hierarchical structure, and it wasn't horizontal in terms of that. So when we went and lived in Riyadh for 3 years, I was very fortunate to actually, it was the first nonprofit in the kingdom. And it was set up by the American Embassy at that time because there were roughly 30,000 Americans in the kingdom who weren't affiliated with the embassy. Many of them were with engineering companies, doing a lot of building, construction, obviously oil and gas. And so I organized the first coursework for a lot of these, as well as Military University of Maryland. We had University of Maryland campus. We had a 4-story building downtown Riyadh. But I have to tell you what I learned 2 things. First thing people would ask me is, who are you and where are you from? And there was a familiar connection. I think the fact that we had a young child didn't hurt us because that gave us a sense of family and introduction. I often had to go to the Riyadh Development Authority, where I would be the only woman at the table with all the men discussing programs that we wanted to do. But I found, going back to, I think, something that Jane said and even Michael said, listening, but also being open and understanding that we both want the same thing. We may have different approaches, we may have different expectations or boundaries, but I actually was struck by how much amazing things were happening in the kingdom. And the time I've now spent in Kuwait and elsewhere, there are many really amazingly talented women engineers in these countries doing some wonderful things. And there's some women universities that are having incredible impact on these kingdoms, looking at issues around climate change, around what's happening in terms of research and such. So I found my experience different, but very positive, partially because we were trying to do the same thing, but maybe from just a different approach. So I think that openness was helpful. I think the other thing that's not to say that there weren't challenges, but I think I had some very good mentors who kind of guided me about what was appropriate and not appropriate. And I think that's one thing that I don't know if Jane has mentioned, she's, I think, hinted to a little bit, but having mentors early on in my career, all men, who were very honest and straight, authentic about, this is what you need to work on, this is what you're good on, this is where I think your talents are, were really impactful to my career. And I think for me, the one thing I learned in some of the work I did with UNESCO, helping them train their fellows. They have a fellowship program with L'Oreal where they have women doing graduate and postdoctoral work all over the world. And for many, many years, I've trained them about what they can do when they go to their new institution, university, is that not only do you need a mentor to train and help you, but they also have to teach you what are the rules under the table at the institution you're going to. Because so often you may have the great scientific or engineering training, but you don't understand, here are the rules and expectations of how you behave, and how you understand those is such an important thing. So I think that helped me very much in my success there.
Yeah, I think, Catherine, I would just kind of bring another point that even in an engineering world, so-called, where it is driven more by very less, I would say, driven by women leaders. But I've also found that the surroundings in these kinds of environments or setups, it's only a reflection of how you perceive your surroundings. If you always are conscious of that gender gap or gender difference, then you will always be treated like being from a different gender. But if you are not, if you try not to be aware or try to make it very obvious for other people, then people would rather accept in that situation, even though there will be a minority of that gender representation. So, Catherine, yes, you have brought a very good point in how you perceive and how you are accepted by the people surrounding you. Michael, you've already brought out a very important aspect in the accreditation process, that diversity and inclusion is definitely is an important parameter, whether it is accreditation or making Earth a better place to live in or giving everybody an equal chance. But how are some of the indications, or if you can give some suggestions, how to include diversity and inclusion in the workplace, for the benefit of all those leaders and other women and men folk and all gender types who are listening to this conversation? Can you give us some tips how to bring in more diversity, better diversity and inclusion in the workplace?
Yeah. Well, I'm not in the hiring business, so I can't give you inside stories, but I do want to share a story. My wife, Allison, whom some of you know, is a retired electrical engineer. And when we first met in the late 80s, okay, early 90s, she was going to school, did her undergraduate in electrical engineering. And at that time, there was virtually no women in electrical engineering, right? And she ended up being the top grad at University of Colorado, Colorado Springs, where she went to school. And so she received that so nice award. She went out and interviewed probably 6 or 7 different companies. She got offers at all of them, and they all wanted her to be a marketer. They wanted her to go to marketing. And I think at that time, I think the idea was that women were better with customers, or they presented the company better, or I don't really know. But she was somewhat insulted, and so she ended up working with NCR Microelectronics, which now is AT&T and whatever. But they had her interview again for the job. She did a technical interview, did great, and she ended up being a circuit designer for 2 years. Then she decided, okay, I want to move on and do other things. And she ultimately ended up at Johns Hopkins in their engineering education for executive programs. But seeing that experience was a real eye opener to me. And I think industry will hire talent if you have good talent. You've done well in school. A lot of the responsibility falls on oneself. To really be don't let barriers get in your way to a degree, I think. So you have to keep that in mind. And then we all need a support network, right? And we've heard about the mentors already, but certainly, as women and other minorities go through school, there's engineering is not an easy subject to study at all. It doesn't matter what it is, right? It's probably one of the more challenging. And so to have a good support network in place across the board is really important. And we get that in different ways. But, I guess, nowadays, I think graduates are in the driver's seat in many ways, because graduates determine where they're going to want to go to work. The demand for technical people is so high. Companies have to share the values that graduates are looking for. And so I think, one of the things that a lot of industry perhaps needs to do is do a little self-reflection and see what kind of company do we want to be, right? What impact do we want to have on the world? And when they identify that in a positive way, then I think that'll make their task of hiring good, qualified, diverse people, pool of employees a whole lot easier. And so again, I think, I would say it basically ends up with values, because that's really what students and graduates want. They want to work for companies that are good for the environment, good for the world. They can go home and feel good about themselves after a day of work.
Yeah, I agree with you, Michael, because there are very many workplaces now, many organizations who are very conscious of having a diverse workforce coming from various geographical locations, from different genders, and so on and so forth. And they're already seeing the positive impact on the outcomes and that they are able to achieve. So yes, Michael, I agree with you on that. Catherine, I read in your story that when you returned to US and you had 3 job opportunities, right? If correct me if I'm wrong. You had 3 job opportunities, and but my question to you is, why did you choose to work at AWM over the other job opportunities you were offered? What was your deciding point? What were the parameters you looked at? Because I'm sure in the audience and those who are going to watch this webinar later, these kinds of questions and the crossroads many people find in their rising careers and in their path when they are at the crossroads of making this kind of decision. But I'm sure your answer would help that. So requesting you to please.
I will try. You're correct. When I came back, I had three job offers. One to work on Capitol Hill in the Congress. One to work in a more international community with working with people coming to the U.S. And one with this nonprofit, this very at that time small nonprofit called Association for Women in Science. And as I tell in the book, I had a mentor from the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace who I trusted, who happened to be named Mike. And I went to him and I was really struggling. I think partially because sometimes we think about what am I good at, but we don't often think about what do I enjoy. Because that's if you look at a Venn diagram, you can have many things that you're good at, but they may not necessarily be what you enjoy. And so sometimes we think this is the path we should take. And Mike said, you know, Kitty, I think you really enjoy growing organizations and working with them in a way that helps them, and very much that you can kind of put your own take on it in a way that's collaborative but growing. And if that's the case, then AWIS would be a better fit for you, from my opinion. And I think he was absolutely right. So I think part of the honesty in being authentic is sometimes we have expectations of where we should be or what we should do that may not really reflect what we enjoy, where our passion is, and where we want to have impact. And so I think looking at that was very helpful. I think the other thing that I realized from the work I did at AWIS in particular, we worked with a lot of other professional science and engineering societies, both internationally as well as US based. And there were a lot of assumptions, I think, being made if you're an association, unlike ABET, which is obviously very specifically tied to engineering disciplines, but you're tied to a community you're trying to serve, whether it's women, whether it's people of color, whether it's from a certain region. People assume that that's your only focus and that you don't have a commonality there. So going back to, I think, what Jane was saying and others were saying, my initial first job was to articulate the value proposition that we had that very much, I think, helped them understand that we were actually part of the solution, not part of the problem. And then the final thing I will add is that no decision is a perfect decision. And I think particularly with women, we really struggle with some of these. And one of the things there's a book, it's been out for a while, but it's called Women Don't Ask. And it was done by a couple of faculty from Carnegie Mellon institution, a university. And what they argued in that book was often when you're in the process of negotiating, whether it's for a fellowship or if it's for a position or whatever it may be, don't put on the table what you're willing to negotiate away if it's important to you. So if it's mobility, if it's time, if it's having resources because you want to write, if it's making sure you have a laboratory space, if it's making sure you have travel funds so you can go to the conference, be honest about what is it you need to be successful. And it may not be the higher salary. It may be actually, I need more time off to do this research, or I need an opportunity to collaborate because I have a collaborator in Germany. I need travel funds. And I thought that was a really interesting perspective of thinking about what is it I need to be successful. It's in whoever's hiring you's interest that you are successful, but you know what the tools are, you know what your weaknesses are. So how can you be authentic to that and honest to that will help you be more successful.
Great. So if you're struggling with something, being a woman shouldn't stop you from asking for it. You need to ask for whether it is help or an extra piece of, you said so many things. You know, you want more time for doing a particular research, you need to ask for it. Sometimes we just think that people would have understood and they would give it to us, but why? What's the matter? Why don't we ask for it? Catherine, yes, and the other point, what is it that makes one happy? So the choices should also be made on that, and no decision is perfect decision. Catherine beautifully pointed out. Thank you so much for those things. Jane,
should we take some time for the audience? Questions, comments?
Yes, sure, why not?
Whenever you're ready.
Do we already have some questions?
Question, and I'm sure other people might come in.
Yeah. Yes, sure. So let us give the chance. If anybody has a question, I think GoToWebinar has a.
I can read them out. Yeah, I can read them out. The chat questions. I see quite a few people in the audience here, experienced people who might want to interact with our panelists. So So the one question is about particularly something that you, Archana, might be able to reflect on is differences in the different countries in the world, in terms of women empowerment. And this is from a male professor saying that in India, women are empowered only on paper, but not really empowered. So what are your thoughts on that? And maybe some of the other panelists can talk about their experiences with women around the world. Are there differences between women in USA, women in India, and so on?
I think Catherine already pointed out some of the incidences of her experience of working in Saudi Arabia as compared to Switzerland and US. But I would agree with what the comment that came just now is that, but that's not universally true. That he said that the women empowerment is only on paper, but not there. It's not universally true. But yes, we as developing country, and I am not hesitant to admit that definitely India is a male-driven society, had been. And slowly we are making our ways forward, whether it is workplace or home. We are empowering more, women more and more people are becoming aware of it. They're all already looking at the good side of it, the positive impact of having more diversity and inclusion at the workplace, and they are moving towards it. But yes, you are right. Sometimes it is only on paper, just for making reports and not on ground. But Catherine has already in fact, she has already deliberated and given her opinion, experienced and shared her experience. I would go to Michael because he works in all sorts of countries across the world for accreditation, and he has seen so many institutions and organizations. What's your take on this question, Michael?
Well, one of the challenges that we face, all of us, is, where we are has evolved over many years, right, in terms of our norms and our cultures and so forth. And so making changes sort of overnight is a difficult thing. And so I think, yeah, there are differences around the world depending on where you are. I mean, if you just look at educational systems, for example, I lived in the UK for a number of years, and it's very traditional to have in high school, girls in one school, boys in the other. We have some of that in the US, but not always. And so there's always that. And I think it's going to take time for things to sort of level out, if you will. And again, I'll go back to I think we live in exciting times right now because the need is so great. We have such great talent. Of course, the big challenge, of course, is getting more women into the STEM fields from the get-go. But that again goes back to this challenge we face, I think, culturally in many areas where the expectations and sort of like the opportunities that young women see, do they see themselves as STEM professionals? And in many cases, they see themselves otherwise. So actually, leaders like yourselves are so critically important because young women need to look at you and say, yeah, that could be me, right? That could be me. And so definitely the value, the values around the world are different. Every country is different. We see that certainly in my travels and through what we do at ABET. But I'm very optimistic that we're changing for the better. And we just need to do it as fast as we can.
May I add really quickly?
Yeah, Catherine, I'll just make a statement and then we'll come to you. I just wanted to say that Mahatma Gandhi said that make the difference that you really want to see in the world. So you need to be the change maker first, and then comment about the whole world. Over to you, Catherine. You wanted to make a comment.
I just want to make two quick comments. I agree very much with what Michael said. I think one thing is that we can't make assumptions. For instance, I think often as Americans, when we go into a situation, we may be more brash, more loud, more assumptions about this is a behavior that's appropriate. So I think there's culturally appropriate behavior in different cultures, but where we can look and what we can talk about the difference is then looking at the data of what happens. So for instance, in some countries, you have women doing quite well going to graduate degrees in engineering, but are they being employed? In other places, you lose women from the graduate degree where they don't finish the graduate degree. So I think we can't make assumptions that just because people may be acting in different ways that they aren't actually succeeding. And and I would like us to have not just one solution, just like we don't have one size of pants or one size of dress. Culturally, we have different ways of showing leadership. and that's okay for men and women. But I do think that there is a role for data to be collected to show where are the transition points where we're losing women, because I can tell you they're different in different regions of the world, and therefore the solutions and how we address them have to be different.
Okay, I have another question from Samita. The question is about migration. Samita, if you want to talk about it yourself, you're welcome, but I'll just read it out. I think she says migration makes one a much more adjusting kind of person. This is meant, I think, for let's see. Okay, and which to Jane. Okay, yeah. At times one ignores quickly your own choices. So I was curious about that. That's what she says. Because you're too adjusting. Does it make you too adjusting?
Yeah. You
Maybe
know.
she wants
Was that your question, Samita?
maybe
Yes.
then she
Yes.
wants you
Yes.
to differentiate between compromise and adjustment.
Yes, we tend to quickly, forego what we like and we want to get accepted. And with time, that changes the personality. So I was curious, as Jane, you had been, moving from one school to other, and you are so successful in identifying your own strength. And this is really commendable. So I felt, how did you keep your own likes and dislikes clear, but still get adjusted by, new environment and new people?
It's an excellent question, and I would say it's a very fine balance, because you do want to fit in. I think it's quite natural as a human being to be accepted, but still being true to yourself. And I think it's the initial time you do meet new people that's really crucial, to actually take a step back and listen. So you're not actually changing yourself. You're just intrigued, and you're interested. And when people see that from you, they tend to accept you, and you can be yourself. So it is a bit of a fine line, but I think it's that core value of I am really interested about people. It's just who I am, and I don't know whether that's actually a more of a woman trait than not, because we as women are interested with other people. I love people watching.
Okay.
Yes.
Aliki has a few questions that she wants to read out. Aliki, come in.
Thank you, Dr. Krishna. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for the panel. This was very inspiring. I wanted to ask also to Dr. Archana, have you discovered any fears given societal expectations, professional expectations, and how have you dealt with them? And then ultimately, just a question to the panel, in what ways have you contributed to share into diversity inclusion efforts, especially being, a champion of women empowerment and leadership?
Thank you for that question, Aliki. Yes, I'm not hesitant to admit that the societal demands and the professional or the workplace demands sometimes are contradicting. And sometimes they are in so much of contrast that you always find yourself continuously on crossroads of making a choice, whether to go this way or that way, because, as women, we always try to balance out. We don't have the privilege of, like men, to go this way and never get questioned about it. We always have, if we go this way, because we think that the professional demand is more, and we need to sort of do away or compromise with the societal or the family kind of pressure and demand, you always get questioned. And if you do the other way, you get questioned from the professional front. So yes, it's always a challenging proposition. But then it's the mentors. I think Catherine and Jane both pointed out that it's your mentors and your support system that you have in your family and friends that comes to your rescue. And you always need not to feel, guilty about making that choice. Catherine has already pointed out that there are difficult choices. Jane has pointed out that there are challenges, and the decision may not always be right. So it's okay to make a decision and stand by it, whether it's right or wrong. It's definitely important to make the decision at the right time. It may not be correct in all aspects. So that's my take on the personal front, but for the professional front and the other things, maybe we can talk to Jane and Catherine on this.
So from my perspective, one of the things I think that I'm proud of, and I think my guess is everyone on this panel has done, is making the time to spend with men and women who are on their career path, who want someone that they can talk to frankly about their fears, their concerns. In many cases, when you're struggling, going to your advisor or going to your immediate supervisor isn't the best place to share those stories, because they may lead to questions about your fit or your engagement or your commitment to the entity. And I think having an open door policy or an open Zoom policy these days of engaging and thinking about how you can share and often be a mirror back to them about here are the strengths or what I think you can do. And I think also being an advocate. One of the things, I mentioned a mentor earlier and how that mentors were so important to me, but not only do you need mentors, you need champions. So you need people who will give you visibility. So having the opportunity for someone to not only show you the rules of the table, maybe take a flashlight, shine it and say, here are how we function at this institution or this organization, but then to shine a light actually on you and give you the opportunity to have speaking engagements or writing opportunities, whatever they may be. And I think that collaboration is something I'm very proud of. And having that, I have now, mentees and colleagues all over the world who now often will bring projects to me because they're very successful and say, here's something I would love to work with you on. And so I think having a place where you can share, because we all struggle, we all have questions, where you can go to and have what we would call a closed loop, where your fears or concerns are shared, where you can get feedback, but it's not feedback that will impact your current position or job.
Archana, we have they take a minute or so to wind up, and we have Hans wants to say a few words.
Yes, sure.
Krishna, are there not any more questions or
Yeah,
comments?
any more comments from the panel, Archana? Hans can jump in otherwise.
Archana, please.
I have a final comment to make. This is the best panel that I have moderated, because all the comments and the insights are coming from the woman and from the man. Michael, who has mentored himself, so many, and he has found out ways and means to bring diversity and inclusion in his current role and otherwise also. And also, Jane and Catherine, you have brought out so many, I would say from the experience, you have brought out so many points which would go a long way in helping and shaping the career of the women and men who are listening to this webinar. Thank you so much. Over to you, Hans, for your final.
Well, thank you. This is just inspiring, and I'm very honored and privileged to have this opportunity to listen to you and to learn from you. And one of the things that Aliki, Salma, and I will do, and Krishna, is share this conversation recording globally. Take a very active role, because we had a good number of friends and colleagues globally participating, but the thoughtfulness, the insightfulness of this dialogue is just amazing. Let me just change the notion here and moving forward. I just wanted to because we have many members of our IUCE, our wonderful partners, and IFEES and GEDC community with us here today. We are working currently with some awesome friends and colleagues, inspiring leaders in the MENA and Arab world to write our next edition of Rising to the Top. So I just want you to be aware of that without going to details per se. And the same, there's our dear sister and colleague Professor Gada from Egypt. We're working closely with them. Furthermore, we're working with our dear colleague and friend and leader Khadija from Malaysia, and she's working on the other edition focusing on Southeast Asia. My hope is that these two books will come together. Also, of course, I appreciate Michael's and Abed's and others' support in terms of those two editions. My hope is that by the end of the year, hopefully by Cape Town, when we come together, the IFEES GEDC community in November, I hope to see many of you in person after quite some time. And we are preparing, so I want to put this on your radar screen. I obviously want to see all of us in person at late November in Cape Town, and I hope you can join us. Critically important, not only of the engineering leaders, corporate colleagues, deans, and professors, is the students. The engagement and participation engagement of students. We have a lot of spaces in Cape Town. I just wanted to let you know about that. The other thing, just very briefly to say, we are working very diligently in terms of the continuation of our GDC Industry Forum. We have webinars leading up to Cape Town, and I'm in discussions with leadership in Sashtec, Shenzhen, China. Hopefully, we can meet in person. The deans and corporate colleagues in China next year. We'll see. We know there are lots of complexities without going into details on that. So, and finally, many of us or some of us will be together in Minneapolis next month, the ASE annual meeting, the first time that IFEES and GEDC friends and colleagues are there. If you're coming there, just let me know that per se. But thank you. It's been really an inspirational experience. I'm grateful, humble to know you not only professionally but personally. And thank you for your very, very thoughtfulness, and just stay safe, and let's all hope for
Thank
peace.
you, Archana, for fantastic moderation, and thank you, Jane,
And
Michael, and Katie.
I also want to thank the 3 great men talk here who have shaped so many women leaders around the world. Thank you, Hans. Thank you, Krista. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, everybody.
Of course. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye. Peace be with you.
Peace be with you. Yeah.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.